Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Roggio. I'm Senior Fellow at Foundation for Defense of Democracies and editor of FDD's Long War Journal. And this is Generation Jihad, the podcast that covers the vast global landscape of the war on terror. It's been over 20 years. It's been a long war. That's why we named it the Long War Journal. A lot has been going on. A lot of this has been masked by the situation in Ukraine. The Russian invasion of Ukraine rightfully has overshadowed a lot of the developments in the war on terror, but that war is still occurring. Today, we're going to discuss we're going to go back to Afghanistan, a place I'd rather not talk about, just given what's happened over the last year. It's been a long year plus with Afghanistan. And I routinely try to put it out of my head, but the events there and the groups operating there don't want Afghanistan to go away. Afghanistan is a safe haven for terrorist group under the control of the Taliban. Al-Qaeda is operating there. A host of Central Asian terror groups continue to operate there. We're going to have an update in a week or two on a group known as Jamaat Ansarullah, which is a Tajik terror group that is operating in Afghanistan. The Taliban put the leader of this group, who is a Tajik national, in control of 5 districts in northern Afghanistan. That happened last summer. So this, contradicts the Taliban's claim that that it doesn't allow foreign terror groups or foreign terrorists to operate on their soil. That's just merely one example. We know that other terror groups are operating there, including the Pakistani Taliban. But what's caught the attention in Afghanistan over the last 2 weeks has been the string of attacks launched by the Islamic State. Now, the Islamic State, also known as the Islamic State Khorasan Province, often called ISIS-K or ISK, is an enemy of the Taliban. It won't submit to the Taliban rule. The Islamic State's way of operating is it wants all jihadists to swear fealty to its emir. The Taliban won't do that, and Al-Qaeda groups won't do that, and therefore they're mortal enemies. And the Taliban and the Islamic State particularly are bitter enemies, because the Taliban wants primacy of the jihad in Afghanistan. The Taliban controls all 34 of Afghanistan provinces. The Islamic State is operating as a terror group. It doesn't control territory, but it does have the capacity to launch terror attacks. Since about November, it's been largely dormant. Very small scale attacks here and there, but nothing really of note. And then beginning on April 19th, there was a bombing at a school in Kabul. It targeted the Shia Hazara minority. And at least 6 people were killed in that attack. 2 days later, another attack against the Shia in Mazar-e-Sharif in Balkh province, killed 31 people and wounded over 80. And then the next day in Kunduz province, in Kunduz city, it hit a Sufi mosque, killed 33 and wounded at least 2 or 3 dozen in that attack. Sufi are a branch of Shia Islam, a mystical branch, and the Islamic State doesn't like the Shia, it doesn't like the Sufis. The Islamic State doesn't like anyone, but unless you're swearing allegiance to the Islamic State. The Islamic State launched a mortar attack in April against Uzbekistan. It did it from right along the border with Uzbekistan. This was the first attack launched by the Islamic State out from Afghanistan against another country. Again, a mortar/rocket attack. But there's something of note. So the Islamic State is that the United Nations estimates the Islamic State has several thousand fighters. How does the Islamic State have the ability to conduct these types of attacks? Well, it's operating underground as a terrorist group. It doesn't control any territory inside of Afghanistan, but it's operating on a cellular level in multiple areas. Previously, the stronghold of the Islamic State was in Nangarhar province in eastern Afghanistan, as well as in Kunar in northeastern Afghanistan. The Taliban launched some operations to root out the Islamic State. and it's had success. It took whatever towns that may have been under control or influenced by the Islamic State, and they claim to have killed and captured hundreds of Islamic State fighters. But the Islamic State, how was it formed? It was made up in 2015 of former Pakistani Taliban fighters or fighters from the movement of the Taliban in Pakistan, disaffected members of the Afghan Taliban, and a handful of Al-Qaeda fighters, again, who were all disaffected with either Al-Qaeda or the Taliban of their organizations. Sometimes they just disagreed with tactics and strategy. Some of them may have been cut out or marginalized by their groups. And, and keep in mind at that point in time, too, the Islamic State was the hot item. It declared the caliphate in Iraq and Syria. This is something that the more bloodthirsty or impatient jihadists were very supportive of. And that's what that garnered support. And this is how the Islamic State had, how it formed. And it's able to reach out to the more, to the jihadists or potential jihadists who share a worldview. So they're active in recruiting in Afghanistan and Pakistan and other areas of South Asia and Central Asia. But the group itself remains, comparatively speaking, to the Taliban, it's marginalized. It can carry out, a spate of attacks like this. And in this case, the Islamic State announced a campaign called Revenge of the Two Sheikhs. It's for its previous emir and a spokesman who were killed in raids in Syria. Also happened over the Ramadan. So that's an incentive for those attacks to be carried out. And it was an opportunity for the Islamic State to get itself back on the map, get its name in the press and show that it's relevant inside of Afghanistan. I wrote an article, I can't remember when, several months ago, noting that while the Islamic State is certainly a problem in Afghanistan, the real problem actually is the Taliban, and that the Taliban really holds all the cards when it comes to, who has the chance for success inside of Afghanistan. Again, it controls all 34 provinces. It controls all the government institutions. It has well over 100,000 fighters in its rank. It has it has all the military hardware and ammunition left by the U.S., that was given to the Afghan military, that the now defunct Afghan National Army and Afghan National Police and the NDS, National Directorate of Security. The Taliban has a state sponsor in both Pakistan and to a lesser degree Iran, whereas the Islamic State is isolated. It doesn't play well with others because, again, it's either the Islamic State, essentially it's their way or the highway. Either you swear allegiance to their emir and join the Islamic State, or you're against the program. And whereas the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda aligned jihadist groups definitely play a more clever political game when it comes to, they play well with others. The Islamic State threat inside of Afghanistan isn't going to go away, but the Islamic State, at least in the short and medium term, unless something changes, the Islamic State is really just going to be a nuisance more for the Taliban. They just can't muster the fighters. They can't control territory. They don't have access to the weapons and ammunition and to state sponsors, all of those things. So, they're just limited in what they can do inside of Afghanistan other than carry out terrorist attacks and be a nuisance for the Taliban. Now, this doesn't mean it's not a problem for the Taliban. The Taliban itself doesn't like to show weakness. It wants to have full control of Afghanistan. And as long as the Islamic State can carry out attacks such as it has over the last several weeks, it challenges the primacy of the Taliban and its full control over Afghanistan. So what has been happening in the world of Afghanistan, when it comes with respect to the Taliban? And we all know that the Taliban shelters foreign terror groups. I'd mentioned Ansarullah and of course Al-Qaeda and its branch in South South Asia, Al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent. But the Taliban is also allowing the movement of the Taliban in Pakistan to operate on its soil, and attacks inside of Pakistan that are carried out by the movement of the Taliban in Pakistan. I believe the number has doubled since the last year. So the movement of the Taliban in Pakistan wants what the Afghan Taliban has. It wants to create an Islamic Emirate of Pakistan. It wants to put its leader on the throne and impose its harsh version of Sharia law, just as is in Afghanistan. And the Afghan Taliban is supportive of this. Thousands upon thousands of Pakistani Taliban fighters are operating inside of Afghanistan, conducting cross-border attacks. They have safe haven there. And within the last couple of weeks, the Pakistani state launched airstrikes in both eastern Afghanistan and Kunar in northeastern Afghanistan. And the number, I believe, of about 47 Afghan people were killed in these attacks. A large number of them were civilians, were women and children and the elderly. So this has created a big, well, at least I think in the press, a big, the idea that there's some type of divide between the Afghan Taliban and the Pakistani state. And the reality of that is that this is more of a nuisance for both groups, for both the Afghan Taliban and for the Pakistani government, than a problem that is, it's not likely that this is a problem that will lead to open conflict between the two. And the reason for this is that the Afghan Taliban is supported by the Pakistani state. When I say the state, talking about the military, the Inter-Service Intelligence Directorate, and, basically the Pakistani deep state that controls foreign policy. And what you have in Afghanistan with respect to the Afghan Taliban and the Pakistani state is Afghanistan, with the Taliban in control of Afghanistan, Pakistan has what its elites have referred to as strategic depth. And what that means is Afghanistan can't be used by India to undermine activities in Afghanistan. If there's a conflict between Pakistan and India, they have jihadists that are based in Afghanistan that could be used to fight to help defend Pakistan. They could always retreat into Afghanistan, Pakistani, if there's problems with the military. So that's in a nutshell what strategic depth is. And strategic depth for the Pakistani state is far more important than, and I'm characterizing this as this is what how the Pakistani officials would view this. The nuisance of some of their civilians and military and policemen being killed by the movement of the Taliban in Pakistan. It's highly cynical, especially given the fact that tens of thousands of Pakistani soldiers, civilians, and civilian employees or government employees, policemen, have been killed over the last decade and a half, particularly from 2006 to 2000 and let's say about 15, 16, when the movement of the Taliban in Pakistan controlled large portions of northwestern Pakistan. But the Pakistani deep state the establishment is what they're called, is okay with this. It's a price they have to pay in order to support the Afghan Taliban. It's the price they have to pay in order to maintain that strategic depth, because the Pakistani state, the elites, know that the Afghan Taliban supports the Pakistani Taliban. That Durand line, the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, is not recognized by the Pashtuns that live there, that make up a large portion of the Taliban. The Pakistani Taliban, depending on what side of the border, they could be Pakistani Taliban or Afghan Taliban. Look no further than individuals like Hafiz Gul Bahadur or the Haqqani network, who operate on both sides of the border. The Haqqanis, for 2 decades, their headquarters was in Miram Shah in North Waziristan. The Haqqanis are Pakistanis and Afghans. So, this is part of that, what Tom Jocelyn brilliantly referred to as the wheel of jihad. The Pakistani state fights the Pakistani Taliban, which is helped by the Afghan Taliban. The Afghan Taliban is supported by the Pakistani state, and and on this goes. That's just one little glimpse of the wheel. But as long as that goes on, that wheel will not be broken. As long as Pakistan views Afghanistan in strategic depth there to be far more important than the lives of its own soldiers, policemen, and civilians. It's probably one of the more cynical things I've seen in my almost 2-decade career of covering this. But then again, we're talking about Pakistan here. Pakistani state is, the epitome of hypocrisy when it comes to this war. And then we could look no further than Osama bin Laden, right? Osama bin Laden he lived basically in, just outside the west point of Pakistan in a town called Abbottabad. And this isn't a city where you just pick up and move to. In Pakistan, the Pakistani military and intelligence service knows everyone who's in and around Abbottabad. And yet somehow Osama bin Laden was able to live there for years, have a large compound, have a courier going in and out. And that's ultimately how we tracked him down. And we're able to kill him. His anniversary was just recently on May 2nd. The U.S. U.S. Navy SEALs, and the CIA conducted a daring raid into Abbottabad, shut down Pakistan. They had to shut down Pakistan's, air defense radars and black out portions of the city and they couldn't tell the Pakistanis. This is how you know that Pakistan is a duplicitous state, right? They couldn't tell the Pakistanis they were conducting this raid to capture or kill bin Laden. Because you couldn't trust the Pakistanis, and rightfully so. And the Pakistani state, and this was probably began the nadir of the relationship between the U.S. and Pakistan. Pakistan was far more, the Pakistani elites and everybody in Pakistan was far more angry at the United States for going in and unilaterally conducting the raid on bin Laden's compound and killing bin Laden than they were for the Pakistani elites, either knowingly or unknowingly sheltering bin Laden outside of Pakistan's West Point. But that really tells you everything you need to know about Pakistan. That's why they haven't been an ally. And that's why negotiations, when we were negotiating with the Taliban and Zalmay Khalilzad, who was the special representative for Afghanistan reconciliation, a position that doesn't exist anymore because Afghanistan is reconciled under the rule of the Taliban. That's why when he called the Pakistani government a partner in peace in Afghanistan, Tom and I knew that either he was lying through his teeth because everyone in the U.S. government understands that, or he was just basically, he knew what he was doing. It was just yet another cynical ploy. But, and I'll conclude here with, bin Laden, right? It's been 11 years since he's been killed. I just detailed, the background of his death inside of Pakistan. And I don't think bin Laden's death, had the impact that we thought it would. Well, certainly Tom and I knew that the death of bin Laden would not lead to the collapse of Al-Qaeda. And it hasn't. You've had Al-Qaeda establish several new branches. Since his death, Al-Qaeda's, all of its branches swore allegiance to its new emir. Well, not new. It's 11 years now, to Ayman al-Zawahiri, who was Al-Qaeda's deputy on the day of 9/11. So the man who was second in charge of Al-Qaeda on 9/11 and who was one of the co-founders of Al-Qaeda is still alive 21 years after 9/11. It took us 10 years to get bin Laden. We haven't gotten Zawahiri, and he's still active despite the characterization as Zawahiri being a crank or someone who's not in control of the group. And yet we're seeing Al-Qaeda branches, particularly in Africa, flourish. Al-Qaeda's had problems in Yemen, without a doubt, but you have to remember there's an ebb and flow to the jihad, not just globally, but in certain theaters. At times they're up. For instance, in Yemen, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula controlled territory from, I believe it was 2011 to 2012, most of of southern Yemen, and then did so again in 2015, 2016. Shabab, Al-Qaeda's branch in East Africa, and particularly in Somalia, controlled most of southern and central Somalia, including the capital of Mogadishu from about 2007-8 to about 2012. And then the African Union put a mission together with the help of the U.S. and drove them out. But now they're estimated to control at least 25% of that. That estimate is 2 years old, and things have only gotten worse in Somalia. So for instance, so Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, they may be on a downward path right now, but they're not defeated. Shabab is on an upward path after previously being on a downward path. So there's ups and downs to this, to the jihad. The death of bin Laden, certainly was a blow to Al-Qaeda in the short term, but I don't think it had the impact of causing the collapse of the leadership. And as a matter of fact, the U.S. largely took its foot off the pedal after bin Laden's death. The drone strikes in Pakistan that were targeting Al-Qaeda's leadership, began to dwindle immediately after bin Laden's death. 2012 was the peak year. And then and I believe it was either 2011 or 2012, there was a drone strike about one every 3 days in Pakistan. And we killed a lot of senior Al-Qaeda leaders, but Al-Qaeda adapted. We got the bin Laden files. That was something that Tom Jocelyn, and I helped him with that a little bit, but Tom really played a big role in getting the CIA to release the full tranche of the bin Laden files. We're very one of our things that both Tom and I are very proud. We got a sneak peek at those. We got the first look at them, and we put out analysis on that. The files recovered at bin Laden's compound showed that he wasn't a lion in winter, as the Washington Post characterized him, or he wasn't, disinterested or leader. He was an effective leader for Al-Qaeda, and he was a unifying leader for Al-Qaeda as well. But Al-Qaeda didn't collapse after his death. Zawahiri took the reins. He's weathered several crises, including the rise of ISIS, which I'm not certain that Osama bin Laden would have been able to weather. The split between, or the break off of the Islamic State from Al-Qaeda was a monumental or a cataclysmic event in the global jihad. But again, Al-Qaeda still exists. It still is conducting numerous attacks. It's working. It's continuing its project of establishing emirates with the ultimate goal of establishing a global caliphate and imposing Sharia law in all areas under its control. That's what Al-Qaeda was founded to do, and that's what it's working to do today. Just because, the U.S. is disengaged largely from this war. It's disengaged from Somalia. It's the French disengaged from Mali. Obviously the debacle in Afghanistan and the withdrawal, we see that Afghanistan is a safe haven. When you look at the picture of the global jihad today, we're in a far worse situation than we were pre 9/11. I would argue, with the exception of our homeland security, which a lot has been done to strengthen that. But we have to keep in mind that Al-Qaeda's its goal is not to carry out attacks inside the United States and kill civilians and strike military and government targets. That's merely a tactic. Its goal is to establish a caliphate. It uses the tactic of attacking us here in the West or Western interest abroad to achieve that goal, to weaken us, to get us to withdraw. And, bin Laden said, after 9/11, he said, we're going to see who the strong horse and the weak horse is. 21 years after the jihad and after bin Laden said that, the U.S. and the West looks like a weak horse right now, but those things can change. We've had leadership issues spanning both Republican and Democratic administrations, that we have significant problems within our foreign policy establishment, within the military community. The issue of intelligence and what is happening in these theaters has been it's become highly politicized. What we see often is analysis that's based on desired outcomes, of policy outcomes, as opposed to examining the facts on the ground. And until we fix these problems, the United States is going to continue to look like a weak horse when it comes to dealing with our jihadist enemies. And on that upbeat note, I will end this episode of Generation Jihad. Thanks again for everyone for joining us for today's episode. Just a reminder, you could find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. Make sure you subscribe and leave us a review, preferably a positive one. Thanks again, and we'll see you again soon.